Play that tape, my granddaughter said with a laugh. Maybe it'll show Grandma dancing in the 80s. Everyone smiled. No one was prepared for what that old camera was about to reveal. My name is Margaret Sullivan, and I was 72 years old the day my family finally learned the truth they should have known 15 years earlier. It happened during my granddaughter Emily's 18th birthday celebration at my son Michael's house in Burlington, Vermont. The living room was warm with the glow of string lights and the smell of homemade apple pie. Family photographs covered the walls. Laughter drifted from every corner of the room. From the outside, we looked like a close family. The kind people admire. The kind people envy. But appearances can hide many things. I arrived carrying a cardboard box that had been sitting in my attic for years. Inside was an old VHS camcorder that had belonged to my late husband, Robert. He had recorded everything. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, backyard barbecues, school plays, ordinary moments that felt priceless after he was gone. As soon as I set the box on the coffee table, Claire rolled her eyes. Claire was my daughter-in-law. Beautiful, polished, and always certain she was the smartest person in every room. You still keep that thing? She asked with a small laugh. Margaret, they have phones now. A few people chuckled politely. I smiled. Some memories are worth keeping. Claire shrugged and turned away. The conversation moved on, but I noticed Emily watching the box with curiosity. Emily had always been different. Kind. Thoughtful. The only person in the family who still called me every Sunday. Over the years, most of the others had grown distant. Not openly cruel, just distant. Like people stepping farther away from a fire until they no longer feel its warmth. I had learned to accept it, or at least pretend I had. 15 years can teach a person many things. It can teach patience. It can teach silence. It can teach you how to smile while carrying a broken heart. As everyone gathered around the dining table for cake, I sat quietly near the window. Outside, the late summer sun was sinking behind the trees. The sky glowed orange and gold. Robert used to love evenings like that. For a moment, I thought about him. I thought about the last conversation we had before he passed away. I remembered how serious he sounded when he handed me a small box of old tapes. Keep these, he had said. One day, they may matter. At the time, I thought he was simply being sentimental. I never imagined how right he would be. After dessert, Emily carried the old camcorder into the living room. Let's see what's on these tapes, she announced. Several relatives gathered around the television. Michael laughed. This should be embarrassing. Even Claire smiled. Maybe we'll find proof Mom had bad hair in the 90s. More laughter filled the room. Emily sorted through the tapes one by one. Birthday 1998. Christmas 2001. Lake trip. Thanksgiving. Then she stopped. Her smile faded. She pulled out a tape with a handwritten label that looked older than the others. The room grew strangely quiet. That's weird, she said. This one says do not erase. I felt my breath catch. The handwriting was Robert's. I knew it immediately. My fingers tightened around the armrest of my chair. Across the room, Claire's expression changed for only a second. Most people would have missed it. I didn't. A flash of surprise. A flash of worry. Then it disappeared. Emily held up the tape. Grandma, do you know what this is? I stared at the faded label. 15 years seemed to collapse into a single moment. Memories I had spent years trying to bury came rushing back. The accusations. The whispers. The day I lost my place in my own family. Slowly I shook my head. No, I said. But I think we're about to find out. The room remained quiet as Emily turned the tape over in her hands. Around her, family members shifted in their seats, waiting for the old machine to come to life. But before anyone pressed play, I found myself staring at the faded handwriting on that label, and suddenly I was no longer sitting in my son's living room. I was 15 years younger, standing in my own kitchen on a cold October morning, wondering how everything I loved had slipped away so quickly. Back then, Robert was still alive. Our home felt different. The mornings were filled with the smell of coffee and the sound of his newspaper rustling across the table. We had been married for more than 40 years, and although life was not perfect, it felt steady, safe. Then everything changed after Emily's college fund disappeared. It was not a fortune by some standards, but it was enough to matter, enough to pay for tuition, enough to create panic. I still remember Michael arriving at our house that afternoon. His face was pale. Claire stood beside him with tears in her eyes. They told us the account had been drained. Every dollar was gone. At first, everyone thought it had to be a mistake, a banking error. some misunderstanding. But the investigation pointed somewhere unexpected. Someone had accessed documents that were stored in our house. Someone who knew where everything was kept. Someone who had been alone in the study several times during that month. The suspicion slowly turned toward me. No one accused me directly at first. They did not have to. I saw it in the questions. I heard it in the pauses. Michael stopped calling every day. Claire became distant. Relatives who once visited every weekend suddenly became busy. The silence grew heavier each week. I kept telling myself the truth would eventually come out. It always does it not? That is what people say. But sometimes the truth takes a very long time to find its way home. One evening, I overheard Claire speaking softly with Michael in the hallway. She did not know I could hear her. "Maybe your mother needed the money," she said. Maybe she was embarrassed to ask for help. Her voice sounded concerned, compassionate, reasonable. That made it worse. Michael did not answer immediately. The silence lasted several seconds. Then he sighed. That sigh hurt more than any accusation ever could. It was the sound of doubt. The sound of a son beginning to question his own mother. After that, things changed permanently. Invitations arrived later and later. Family vacations happened without me. Holiday dinners became smaller, and somehow there was never enough room at the table. Robert defended me every chance he got. He never doubted me for a second, but even he could not stop the distance from growing. I remember one Christmas when Emily was only 3 years old. She ran into my arms and handed me a handmade ornament from preschool. Claire gently pulled her away and reminded her they needed to leave early. They were only there for 40 minutes. I stood at the window and watched their car disappear down the snowy road. Robert wrapped his arm around my shoulder. Neither of us said a word. We did not need to. We both understood what was happening. Year after year, I became less of a mother and grandmother and more of a guest. A polite obligation. Someone included out of courtesy rather than love. Yet through all of it, I never fought back. I never demanded explanations. I never begged anyone to believe me. I simply waited. And now, sitting in that living room 15 years later, looking at the tape Robert had marked with his own handwriting, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Hope. Hope can be a dangerous thing when you have spent years learning how to live without it. As Emily sat cross-legged on the carpet holding that tape, I found myself afraid to breathe too deeply. Around me, the family continued making small talk. Someone carried empty dessert plates into the kitchen. Someone else adjusted the volume on the television. To them, it was an old recording, a forgotten piece of family history. To me, it felt like a door that had been locked for 15 years. I looked across the room at Michael. My son was laughing at something his cousin had said, but the laugh did not quite reach his eyes. Age had changed him. There was more gray in his hair now than brown. Fine lines framed the corners of his face. Yet in that moment, I still saw the little boy who used to run through our backyard carrying a baseball glove almost bigger than he was. The little boy who once told his teacher that his mother could fix anything. Back then, he trusted me completely. Losing that trust had been the hardest part of everything that followed. Not the whispers, not the loneliness, not even the suspicion. It was watching doubt slowly replace certainty in my own son's eyes. Emily carefully set the tape beside the camcorder while searching for the right cables. "This thing belongs in a museum," she joked. A few people laughed. Claire smiled as well, but there was something strained about it. I noticed she kept glancing toward the tape. Just small looks. Quick enough that most people would never pay attention. Over the years, I had become very good at noticing small things. When people stop speaking openly to you, you learn to read what remains. A look, a pause, a change in tone. 15 years ago, I ignored those details because I believed the people I loved would always tell me the truth. I was not so naive anymore. My mind drifted back to the months after the accusations. Robert and I continued living in the same house, but the atmosphere around us had changed. Phone calls became rare. Visits became shorter. Sometimes weeks passed without hearing from Michael. Whenever I asked if something was wrong, he always said no. Yet there was a distance in his voice that had never existed before. One spring afternoon, I drove nearly 40 miles to attend Emily's elementary school music recital. I sat in the second row holding a small bouquet of flowers. After the performance ended, dozens of families gathered for photographs. I waited patiently. Parents hugged their children. Grandparents celebrated. Teachers smiled. Eventually, I spotted Claire leading Emily toward the parking lot. I waved. Emily waved back enthusiastically, but Claire kept walking. By the time I reached them, they were already getting into their car. "We have another appointment," Claire explained. "Maybe next time." Then they left. I stood there holding those flowers long after the parking lot emptied. When I finally returned home, Robert placed the bouquet in a vase without saying a word. He understood. He always understood. The years continued passing like that. Not with dramatic confrontations. Not with angry arguments. Just quiet exclusions. One missed holiday became 2. One forgotten invitation became 10. Piece by piece, I stopped expecting anything different. Yet through all of it, Robert kept certain things locked away in his study. Documents. Notes. Old recordings. Whenever I asked why he saved everything, he would smile and say, "Because memories matter." Sitting in Michael's living room now, watching Emily connect the ancient machine to the television, I suddenly wondered if Robert had meant something more. Across the room, Claire crossed her arms tightly. For the first time that evening, she did not look comfortable. And as the blue screen flickered to life, a strange feeling settled over the room. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it was there. The feeling that something long buried was finally about to be uncovered. The machine hummed softly as Emily adjusted the tracking controls. For a few seconds, nothing appeared except static and scattered lines drifting across the screen. Someone joked that the tape had probably been damaged decades ago. Another relative suggested giving up and looking at old photo albums instead. But Emily was stubborn. She had inherited that trait from her grandfather. She continued pressing buttons, determined to make the recording work. I sat quietly in my chair, watching the screen and remembering Robert. The longer I stared at that flickering image, the more I thought about the final years of his life. Most people remembered him as a gentle man who never raised his voice. What they did not know was how observant he had been. Robert noticed everything. Small details, tiny inconsistencies, things that other people overlooked. After the college fund disappeared, he never stopped asking questions. While everyone else gradually accepted the explanation they had been given, Robert kept searching for answers. More than once he told me that something about the entire situation felt wrong. "The pieces do not fit," he would say while sitting at his desk late at night. I remember one particular evening, almost 14 years ago. Rain tapped against the windows while Robert reviewed old paperwork spread across the dining room table. I brought him a cup of coffee and asked why he continued torturing himself with a mystery that nobody else seemed interested in solving. He looked up and smiled sadly. "Because truth matters, Margaret, even when people stop looking for it." At the time, I appreciated his loyalty but believed he was holding on to false hope. The family had already moved on. Michael rarely discussed the missing money anymore. Claire acted as though the entire event belonged in the past. Relatives avoided mentioning it altogether. Only Robert continued paying attention. Looking back now, I realized there were signs I should have noticed. There was the afternoon when Robert installed extra storage shelves in his study specifically for old recordings and documents. There was the day he spent hours transferring labels onto videotapes. There was the conversation we had shortly before his illness became serious. We were sitting on the back porch watching autumn leaves drift across the yard. The air smelled like wood smoke from a nearby chimney. Robert handed me a small key and told me to keep it somewhere safe. When I asked what it opened, he simply smiled. "Something important. Someday you might need it." I never found out what he meant. After he passed away, grief swallowed everything else. Some mornings I struggled just to get out of bed. Some evenings the silence inside our house felt unbearable. During those years, I stopped searching for answers. I stopped hoping anyone would change their mind about me. I focused on surviving one day at a time. Across the room, a burst of static pulled me back to the present. The screen flashed. Shapes began to form. Emily straightened immediately. "Wait," she said. "I think I got it." Everyone grew quiet. The image remained blurry, but it was improving. Chairs stopped moving. Conversations faded. Even the children became silent. Beside Michael, Claire shifted uncomfortably. Her smile had disappeared completely now. She folded her hands together and stared at the screen without blinking. I noticed a faint tension around her eyes. The kind people get when they are expecting bad news. For the first time all evening, she seemed eager for the tape not to work. Emily adjusted one final setting. The static cleared a little more. Suddenly, a familiar room appeared on the television. My heart skipped. It was our old study. The very room where so many questions had begun 15 years earlier. And as the grainy image steadied, I realized this was not a family celebration or holiday recording. Whatever Robert had captured that day, he had considered it important enough to mark with 3 simple words that nobody had seen until now. Do not erase. No one spoke as the image settled into focus. The study looked exactly as I remembered it. The oak desk stood beneath the window. Family photographs lined the bookshelf. A grandfather clock ticked quietly in the corner. For a moment, nothing unusual happened. The recording simply showed an empty room bathed in afternoon sunlight. A few relatives exchanged confused glances. Someone whispered that perhaps the tape had started before the real event. Emily continued watching. Michael leaned forward in his chair. Across the room, Claire remained perfectly still. The camera angle appeared strange. It had been placed high on a shelf near the ceiling, looking down across the entire study. Robert must have positioned it there himself. The date stamp glowed faintly at the bottom of the screen. My chest tightened when I saw it. It was the exact week the college fund disappeared. 15 years vanished in an instant. Suddenly, the study door opened. A younger version of me entered carrying a stack of folded laundry. I smiled sadly at the sight. My hair was darker then, my movements quicker. I crossed the room, placed the laundry on a chair, organized a few papers on the desk, and left less than 2 minutes later. The room became empty again. Several family members glanced toward me. I said nothing. We continued watching. Minutes passed. The old clock moved steadily. Sunlight shifted across the floorboards. Then another figure entered the study. Michael, 15 years younger. He searched through a drawer, removed a folder, reviewed a few documents, and left. Nothing unusual. Nothing important. The tape continued. Another gap. More empty silence. Emily frowned. How long is this recording? She asked. Nobody answered. The room on the screen remained deserted. Then the study door opened again. This time Claire walked inside. A younger Claire. She looked elegant and confident, dressed for a family gathering that had taken place that weekend. Several people in. The living room instinctively turned toward the real Claire. She forced a smile. I probably needed something from the desk, she said lightly. Her voice sounded tight. On the television, Claire closed the study door behind her. That small detail immediately caught my attention. I never closed that door. Neither did Michael. Yet there she was, carefully shutting it before crossing the room. The living room around us grew noticeably quieter. The younger Claire approached the desk and opened a drawer. She removed several documents. She studied them for a few moments. Then she looked over her shoulder. Once, twice, as though checking whether anyone might enter. My pulse quickened. Beside me, Emily sat frozen. Michael stared at the screen without blinking. The recording quality was old, but clear enough to follow every movement. Claire removed additional papers from the folder. She spread them across the desk. Then she reached into her purse. A murmur moved through the room. The real Claire immediately shifted in her seat. This is ridiculous, she said with a nervous laugh. Nobody even knows what we are looking at. No one responded. Every eye remained fixed on the television. The younger Claire continued sorting through the documents. She appeared focused, deliberate, careful, not confused, not rushed. She knew exactly what she was doing. The room felt smaller with every passing second. I could hear the soft hum of the old machine. I could hear someone breathing heavily near the couch. Outside, wind brushed gently against the windows. Yet inside that living room, time seemed to stop. Then the younger Claire removed a single envelope from her purse and placed it beside the documents on the desk. The moment I saw that envelope, a chill ran through me. Because I recognized it immediately. 15 years ago, investigators had described an envelope exactly like that one when explaining how the missing funds had been transferred. And for the first time since the tape began, fear appeared clearly on Claire's face. The silence inside the room became almost unbearable. Nobody looked away from the screen. Nobody reached for a drink. Nobody checked a phone. The old recording held every person in place. On the television, the younger Claire carefully opened the envelope and removed several sheets of paper. She compared them to the documents already sitting on Robert's desk. Her movements were calm, methodical, deliberate. There was nothing accidental about what she was doing. Beside me, Michael leaned forward so far that his elbows nearly touched his knees. His eyes never left the screen. I could see confusion forming across his face. The kind of confusion that appears when a person begins realizing that a story they have believed for years may not be true. The younger Claire continued sorting through the paperwork. Then she did something that made the entire room freeze. She took one document from the envelope and placed it inside the folder that investigators would later discover. Next, she removed another paper from the folder and slipped it into her purse. The actions were small, simple, yet their meaning was impossible to ignore. Emily covered her mouth with both hands. One of my cousins whispered, "Oh my God." Nobody answered. The recording continued. Claire looked toward the door again. Then she sat down at the desk. She picked up a pen. For several seconds, she appeared to copy information from one document onto another. The quality of the tape was not good enough to read the writing itself, but the intent was obvious. She was altering something, changing something, creating something. The room seemed to shrink around us. I felt my heartbeat echo in my ears. 15 years of questions were unfolding in front of everyone. 15 years of doubt. 15 years of whispered conversations and careful distances and polite smiles that never quite reached people's eyes. Then came the moment that changed everything. The younger Claire finished writing. She placed the pen down. She gathered the documents together. Before leaving, she paused and looked directly toward the camera's hidden location. Not because she knew it was there. She did not. She was simply thinking, calculating. For a brief second, the image captured an expression I had never seen before. Not fear, not uncertainty, satisfaction, the kind of look people, where when they believe a problem has been solved. She placed the altered documents into the folder, picked up her purse, and left the room. The study door closed behind her. The recording continued for another minute. Nothing else happened. Eventually, Robert entered the room carrying a coffee mug. He glanced around, noticed the folder on his desk, and frowned slightly. Then the tape ended. Static returned to the screen. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The old machine hummed quietly in the corner. Emily stared at the blank screen. Michael looked as though he had forgotten how to breathe. Across the room, Claire's face had gone completely pale. "This does not prove anything," she said suddenly. Her voice sounded thin and unfamiliar. "You cannot even tell what those papers were." No one responded. Her words seemed to vanish into the silence. Because everyone had seen the same thing. Everyone had watched her enter that room alone. Everyone had watched her handle the documents connected to the missing college fund. Everyone had watched her remove papers and replace them with others. For years, there had only been suspicion directed at me. Now there was evidence pointing somewhere else. Michael slowly turned toward his wife. His expression was not angry. It was worse. It was devastated. Like a man looking at a stranger wearing the face of someone he loved. Claire opened her mouth as if searching for an explanation. None came. And for the first time in 15 years, I realized that the weight I had been carrying was no longer mine alone. For several long seconds, nobody said a word. The silence felt heavier than any argument I had ever witnessed. Michael remained seated, staring at the blank television screen as though he expected it to come back to life and tell him this had all been a mistake. Emily wiped tears from her eyes. My cousin Linda looked down at her hands. Even the younger family members seemed to understand that something important had just happened. 15 years of certainty had cracked apart in less than 10 minutes. Claire was the first to move. She stood abruptly and forced a laugh that sounded painfully unnatural. "This is ridiculous," she said again. "An old tape does not explain everything." Her words hung in the air. Nobody rushed to agree with her. Nobody defended her. That alone said more than anything else could have. Michael slowly rose from his chair. His face looked exhausted, older than it had an hour earlier. "Then explain it," he said quietly. Claire blinked. "What?" "Explain what we just watched." His voice remained calm, but there was something fragile underneath it. The kind of calm that exists right before a person accepts a truth they never wanted to face. Claire opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No explanation came. Because there was no simple explanation for what everyone had seen. Emily looked toward me. Her eyes were red with tears. "Grandma," she whispered, "you knew?" I shook my head slowly. I knew I was innocent. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. But I never knew how it happened. The room grew quiet again. Memories seemed to pass across every face. Holiday dinners, family gatherings, missed phone calls, invitations that never arrived. People were not just seeing the tape. They were remembering the years that followed. They were remembering the way they had treated me. Michael lowered himself back into his chair and rubbed both hands across his face. I had seen my son sad before. I had seen him stressed. I had seen him grieving after Robert passed away. But I had never seen him look so ashamed. "Mom," he said softly. Just that one word. Mom. The way he used to say it years ago, before distance settled between us, before suspicion became part of every conversation. I looked at him without speaking. "I should have believed you." His voice cracked slightly. "I should have known." No one moved. No one interrupted. Some moments are too important for noise. Emily walked across the room and knelt beside my chair. She wrapped her arms around me and rested her head against my shoulder, the same way she had done when she was a little girl frightened by thunderstorms. Tears slid down her cheeks. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I am so sorry." I placed my hand gently on her hair. 15 years earlier, I might have broken down crying. I might have demanded answers. I might have asked why nobody trusted me. But age changes people. Pain changes people. There comes a point when sadness becomes something quieter, something deeper. Across the room, Claire remained standing alone. For the first time since I had known her, she looked uncertain. Not confident. Not polished. Not in control. Just alone. One by one, family members avoided meeting her eyes. The shift was impossible to miss. For years, I had been the person standing outside the circle. Now the circle had moved. And as I looked around that room filled with regret, sorrow, and difficult realizations, I understood something important. The truth had finally arrived. But it had not come alone. It had brought 15 years of consequences with it. The rest of the evening unfolded in a way none of us could have imagined. The birthday decorations were still hanging from the walls. Half-finished slices of cake remained on paper plates. The candles had long since burned out. Yet nobody seemed interested in celebrating anymore. We were all sitting in the middle of something much larger than a birthday party. We were sitting in the middle of 15 years of lost time. Claire eventually lowered herself into a chair near the far side of the room. She looked smaller somehow, less certain. The confidence that had always surrounded her was gone. No one was speaking to her now. No one was looking at her. For years, she had occupied the center of every family gathering. Tonight she sat alone. Michael remained near the television. Several times he opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, then stopped. I understood why. There are some mistakes so large that words seem useless beside them. Finally he walked toward me. Slowly, carefully, like a man approaching something fragile. He stopped a few feet away. His eyes were red. "Mom," he said, "I do not know how to fix this." I looked at him for a moment before answering. "You cannot." The words were not cruel. They were simply true. Michael lowered his head. "I lost 15 years with you." "We both did," I replied quietly. A tear slid down his cheek. I had not seen my son cry since Robert's funeral. The sight broke my heart more than I expected. Not because I wanted him to suffer. I never wanted that. Even during the hardest years, I never wished pain on anyone. But seeing his regret made the loss feel real. For so long, I had carried those years alone. Now everyone could finally see them. Emily never left my side. She held my hand while relatives approached one by one. Some apologized directly. Others simply hugged me. A few admitted they had doubted me all those years ago. One aunt confessed that she had almost called several times but never knew what to say. Another relative admitted she had followed everyone else's assumptions without questioning them. Their honesty surprised me. It also exhausted me, because every apology reminded me of something that could never be returned. Missed birthdays, missed holidays, missed conversations. Robert should have been there to see this moment. More than anyone, he deserved to witness the truth finally coming to light. I found myself looking toward the old camcorder sitting beside the television. The machine appeared ordinary, dusty, outdated, yet somehow it had preserved what memory could not. It had protected a truth that people had abandoned years ago. Emily noticed me staring at it. "Grandpa knew, did he not?" she asked softly. I smiled sadly. "I think he suspected. And he kept the tape." "Yes." She nodded slowly. "Then he never gave up on you." Those words settled deep inside me. Because they were true. Robert never gave up. Even when everyone else moved on. Even when the family accepted an easy answer. Even when I stopped believing the truth would matter anymore. Across the room, Michael looked at an old photograph hanging on the wall. It showed our family years before everything changed. We were smiling, standing shoulder to shoulder, looking like people who trusted one another completely. "I wish I could go back," he whispered. I understood that feeling. I truly did. But life does not move backward. It only moves forward. The best we can do is decide what we carry with us. And as I sat there surrounded by regret, apologies, and memories, I realized something important. Forgiveness and forgetting are not the same thing. I could forgive. Perhaps one day I fully would. But forgetting those 15 years was impossible. Some chapters never disappear. They simply become part of the story that follows. The gathering slowly came to an end, but nobody seemed eager to leave. The house felt different now. Not lighter exactly, but more honest. The truth had changed the atmosphere in ways that could not be undone. Outside, the night had settled over Burlington. The windows reflected the warm glow of the living room lights, turning the glass into mirrors. As people collected coats and said quiet goodbyes, Emily remained beside me. Michael stayed close as well, as though he were afraid that if he stepped away, I might disappear again. Before leaving, he asked if he could visit me the following weekend. The question sounded simple, but I knew what it meant. It was not really about a visit. It was an attempt to begin rebuilding something that had been damaged for far too long. I smiled gently and told him he was welcome anytime. His eyes filled with relief. Later that evening, after most of the family had gone home, Emily helped me carry the old camcorder and the remaining tapes into the guest room. While sorting through the box, she discovered a small envelope tucked beneath several recordings. The paper had yellowed with age. My name was written across the front in Robert's familiar handwriting. For a moment, I could not move. Seeing his handwriting again felt like hearing a voice I had not heard in years. Emily handed me the envelope carefully. Neither of us spoke. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a single folded letter. I sat down and began to read. Margaret, if you are reading this, then perhaps the answers finally found their way home. I know how much these years have hurt you. I know there were days when you felt forgotten. But I need you to remember something. Truth does not disappear simply because people stop looking for it. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it takes longer than we think. But eventually it asks to be seen. As I continued reading, tears blurred the words. Robert wrote about patience, about dignity, about refusing to become bitter. He wrote that a person's character is revealed not when life is fair, but when life is unfair. Then came the final sentence. If the truth ever returns, do not spend your remaining years looking backward. Spend them being loved by the people who finally learned how much they should have valued you all along. I lowered the letter and sat quietly. The room was silent except for the ticking of a nearby clock. Emily wiped her eyes. Michael looked away, overcome with emotion. In that moment, I understood something Robert had known all along. The greatest victory was never proving that I was right. It was surviving long enough to see the truth without losing myself in the process. A few weeks later, small changes began appearing throughout my life. Michael started calling regularly. Emily visited often. Family gatherings no longer felt uncomfortable. The healing was not immediate. Some wounds never fully disappear. Yet something important had changed. The distance was gone. One Sunday afternoon, I sat on my porch watching autumn leaves drift across the yard. The same porch where Robert and I had shared countless conversations over the years. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. For the first time in a very long while, I felt peaceful. Not because the past had been erased. It had not. Not because every mistake had been fixed. It could not be. I felt peaceful because the burden I carried for 15 years was finally gone. The truth had arrived late. Much later than anyone would have wanted. But it arrived. And sometimes that is enough. Sometimes the truth does not give us back the years we lost. Sometimes it gives us something else. The chance to move forward without carrying someone else's lie. As the sun disappeared behind the trees, I looked toward the empty chair beside me and smiled. Robert had been right. The truth found its way home after all.